Sun Chronicle and AACS. Tonight's debate is being cablecast live and also streamed, cablecast on AACS and streamed on a number of outlets. It will be replayed on AACS a number of times through Election Day. My name is Peter Gay. I am a lifelong city resident and voter. So just like you, I will be listening closely tonight to the two candidates before I head to the polls on the first Tuesday in November. Those candidates are, to my right, incumbent Mayor Paul Heroux, and his challenger to my left, Todd McGee. Now, in addition to answering questions from each other, the two will answer questions from our panelists. They are, next to the mayor, former Sun Chronicle editor and now Weekend Edition columnist Mike Kirby, Attleboro resident, businesswoman, author, and illustrator Crystal Brown Battle, who is seated to the left of Mr. McGee, and businessman and Sun Chronicle columnist Bill Gouveia, who is seated next to Crystal. The panelists will be joined this evening by Shane Mukasa, a seventh grader at the Wamsutta Middle School and a member of the award-winning Kid Reporters team for Scholastic Kids Press magazine and website, which reaches more than 25 million students nationwide, which is slightly more than the subscriptions to the Sun Chronicle and the viewers at AACS. So Kim Kardashian the other night said, she has 82 million followers, 10 million watch Saturday Night Live. This is a piece of cake, so this will be easy for you, Shane. I will be acting as the timer in addition to the moderator. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to make sure everyone has their cell phones in either airplane mode or in silent mode. Also want to remind you that the acoustics in this room make it very easy for the people, especially those standing up against the back wall, to be heard, even if they speak softly, heard up here. If you do need to answer your telephone or make a comment, I would just ask you to step outside for a moment and then return. Also, Shane received a round of applause. I would appreciate it that any applause, any comments, anything, you remain silent until the end of the debate. Otherwise, it's very distracting. You may be here supporting Todd or supporting Paul. You clap and it throws your candidate off as well. Trust me, it's very distracting. To the candidates, I have the utmost respect for the two of you. And please ask that you don't put me in the awkward position of having to interrupt you if you speak beyond the allotted time. Please keep an eye on the time cues that I will be giving you. And as I mentioned earlier, I find the 10-second cue is the best time to wrap up whatever you are saying. The order for everything we do tonight was determined by a flip of the coin. Mr. McGee won the flip of the coin. He chose to be candidate B this evening. We will start with candidate A, which is the incumbent mayor, Paul Heroux. Paul, you have, let me check my notes here, I believe it's 2 minutes. Yes, it is, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you to Sun Chronicle and AACS for hosting tonight's event. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you for what will be my last time running for mayor in Attleboro. It's been an amazing 4 years. The reason I'm running for this third and final term is because I just want to finish off some projects that I've been working on and leave things on a high note. When I ran 4 years ago, I told people I would do 2 terms, maybe 3, and I am sticking to that, 2 terms, maybe 3. The reason I did that, the reason I ran on that 4 years ago was because we had a little bit of mayor for life fatigue. Kevin Dumas, who was an excellent mayor for a long time, he was there for 14 years, and Judy Robbins was there for 12 years before that. So I decided to run for only 2, maybe 3 terms. The job that I've been doing over the last almost 4 years has been the most rewarding job of my life. This is an opportunity where you can make a real difference in the lives of people every day. When I go around knocking on doors, talking to people, it is an opportunity to check in to see how they feel about the direction of the city. And things in the city are actually going really well. We have a balanced budget with no layoffs. When 50 million people in the United States lost their jobs, we didn't have a single layoff of any city employees. Not a single person caught COVID inside City Hall, so that we navigated that quite well. There are a lot of things that we're going to talk about tonight, a lot of the projects that I'm going to be working on, and I look forward to having a nice, fun debate with Mr. McGee. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. McGee, you also have 2 minutes.
Good evening, and thank you to the Sun Chronicle, Mr. Gay, tonight's panelists, and Mayor Hero for the opportunity to participate in tonight's debate. My wife and I have lived in Attleboro for 21 years, where we have truly enjoyed raising our adult children. As mayor, I will bring a combined 34-year career of public, private, and street experience into the executive office, with a focus on servant leadership for our residents' needs. My platform focuses on people, programs, and public service. For people, I plan to invest in education for our precious stakeholders, who are our students, staff, and faculty. Smaller classrooms mean happier teachers, more student engagement, and more adjustment counselors mean more mental health support for potential students at risk. I also look forward to working on greater retention of our public safety professionals in both fire and police so they can reach their retirement years. For programs, I work to enhance the tax work-off program for our seniors and better meet the needs of our underserved community. I'll treat the rat infestation problem like a public health emergency, looking to partner with the community to eradicate the problem. For public service, I plan to take on our aging water infrastructure to mitigate the many water main breaks so our residents don't have to experience brown water when brushing their teeth in the morning. This will require a robust communication plan for effective resident outreach. There are many important matters in our city, but my consistent theme is focusing on the quality of life issues. I'm ready to go to work for our residents. Attleboro needs a win.
Thank you, gentlemen. The first question that will be asked of the candidates this evening will be asked by Shane Macassa. And Shane will ask the question. Todd McGee will answer first. The candidates will have 90 seconds to answer Shane's question. And then after they each answer the question, they will have a minute to comment on the other's answers. So, Shane, you are up.
Thank you. In the year 2026, I will be eligible to vote for the first time. And in the following year, I will graduate from high school. And what will you do as mayor to keep kids like me in Attleboro to raise our own families?
Mr. McGee, 90 seconds.
Thank you, Shane, for that question. I think it starts with looking towards our vision of your generation. I'm 57 years old, and I need to not look through my lens to help support your generation. So I think looking beyond, thinking about different industries, thinking about the education, making sure that your generation is set up for success, extending your education into higher education, which is going to open up tremendous job opportunities for you. So I look forward to being a part of that legacy and keeping in mind your next generation moving forward into decision-making places, especially in a political level.
Mayor, you also have 90 seconds.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. The main job of a mayor is to set a vision for the city, and that vision has to extend well into the future. It's also managing day-to-day activities. I often like to comment to people when I'm talking about the future of our youth that kids born today or babies born today are going to live to see the year 2100. You probably will live to see the year 2100. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. In my role as mayor, to try and keep you here in Attleboro, it's to make for a more fair and equitable, a more comfortable society. That starts with our school department. I'm proud to say that the amount of funding that my administration has given the schools is at record high. It's never been so high, and that is peace of mind to the teachers and the students that don't have to worry about layoffs and disruption. We have a lot of new housing projects going on in the city, mainly apartments and condos. Those are things that we hope that people will be able to benefit from. Is, you know, you have a good place to live, but it's also focusing on the environment, because climate change is real, and we need to be concerned about that. And as I said, you are likely to see the year 2100. You know, that's really important, that we have a real focus on that, a real robust plan to make sure we tackle that challenge for you as well.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Shane, I think something that's critical right now that we need to understand what's happening in our society, something called brain drain. It's happening all over the country. Young people like yourself are getting educated. You're going to go off to college. You're going to receive your higher education. And if we don't start planning now, you're going to probably leave this community to pursue your career. We need to think about sustaining things like the gaming industry. The gaming industry right now is already $1 billion industry. You're smiling. I think you like that idea of gaming industry coming into Attleboro. But that being said, we need to think about sustainable industries that will go into the next generations. Thank you.
Mayor, you have 1 additional minute.
Okay, thank you. So some of Mr. McGee and I are in agreement that brain drain is a concern for any community. And if we're going to invest tens of thousands of dollars in students over the course of time, over the course of their 12 to 13 years in public schools, we hope they're going to go off to college or join the workforce and then, you know, stay here in Attleboro. We have to think differently about what we do with businesses now. A lot of businesses are losing to the internet, and so one of the things we've been focusing on here in Attleboro has been looking to the service industry. We need to create, support businesses. We don't create businesses. We support businesses that are, you know, things that you can't get on Amazon, stuff you can't buy online. That's one of the directions I've been focusing on during my time as mayor over the last 3 years. 10 months.
Shane, you did such a good job on that question. You get to ask another question.
Well, I thank you guys very much for acknowledging some of my beliefs, and I'd also like to ask. The pandemic. It's really taught us to be kind and compassionate to others, now more than ever. So right now, could you guys share one kind comment about each other?
Mayor, you get to go first.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, that's a great question, Shane, so thank you for that. I don't know Mr. McGee very well, but what I do know of Mr. McGee is that he is a family man who is devoted to his family. He is a person of character. He's a person of integrity, and I am, you know, proud that I have him as an opponent. I mean, he's somebody who I've heard good things about as, you know, a person of integrity.
Mr. McGee, your turn.
Thank you, Mayor, for those kind words. You know, Mayor, you addressed the brain drain, literally, right? You were born here, went to high school here, you went off, got your education, and you came back to be mayor of our community. So I commend you for that, and I commend you for championing the different issues within the city to make it a better place.
You have a minute if you'd like to add anything.
Can I get a refund?
No, you can't save them up. I'm having a tough enough time keeping time as it is, never mind adding to them. Mr. McGee, are you all set?
I'm all set.
Shane, with questions like that, you need to go to Washington and ask them to say kind things about each other. Okay, the first question from our 3 panelists will be asked by Bill Gouveia, and it's important to note that the questions from the panelists are purposely addressed to both candidates. Otherwise, you have sometimes the appearance that, well, Mr. McGee was asked a tough question while the mayor wasn't. So every question will be answered by both candidates. Bill?
Thank you for having me follow Shane. Mr. Mayor, Ms. McGee, welcome and thank you for being here. I'd like to ask you both how you believe the pandemic has affected how Attleboro must govern. What adjustments do you believe were the most important to make at the start of the pandemic? What, with the advantage of 2020 hindsight, what might you do differently looking back? And most importantly, what are the important adjustments still ahead that Attleboro must consider given the long-term health and economic impact of COVID-19?
Mr. McGee, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Gouveia. The pandemic has been an incredible challenge. It's hit every industry. We see the problems with supply chain. That's in the latest news reports. We see how workers are not responding to open jobs, and it's just a layered effect. We see the mandates of policy mandates of masks. We see the pushback from both sides of people that believe in vaccinations, don't believe in vaccinations, believe in masks, don't believe in the masking. The pandemic has also become a point of division. And so I think as a community, we need to learn how to work better together. And I also believe that we need to focus on the issues of the economic instability that's happening. It's not sustainable. And we have to figure out a way to work better within the confines of the pandemic.
Mayor, you have 90 seconds.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you for this question. The first week of February 2020, The Economist had on the cover of it a picture that said, "How bad will it get?" And it was talking about the pandemic that hadn't quite hit the United States yet. Well, it got pretty bad, as I think everybody knows. In the first week of March, I convened a meeting with what I would call the emergency team. It was the police, fire, water, wastewater, the health department personnel. And these are the different departments that provided critical services that we have to keep going. Police and fire have to keep going. Water and wastewater, they have to keep going. So I asked the question, what are you going to do if 50% of your workforce is out sick with this virus? And each of the department heads came up with a plan, and so we were ready to execute that plan if we needed to. So we had to think of things in a lot more of an emergency fashion. The next meeting I had was with all of the department heads, and then when we started with that meeting, we didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but the outcome, after we had about probably 20 or so people in the room, 20, 25 people in the room, we were hashing out ideas. The outcome ended up being that we were going to shut down city government. The most important takeaway of those two meetings was that everything we do, we have to do together. And that's how it's been, before that, and that's how it's been ever since. There's no one person that knew everything. There was no playbook. And so that was the way we did it.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute for an additional comment or a comment on the mayor's answer.
I'll just extend my original comment that in February of 2020, I was on my way on business to the Maldives for Department of State work. I was in a layover in Austria, and they had closed their borders for their residents to go into Italy and other places. Italy was one of the highest pandemic peaks. And I said to myself, what's the U.S. response? And we saw that lack of leadership originally in the way the COVID response was happening. And I think what is important is that we need to be prepared to make hard decisions, whether it's on a city level, state level, and everyone says, well, follow the guidance. Well, sometimes we need to make some hard decisions in the short term, but again, those decisions should be flexible enough based on what the data is telling us.
Mayor, you have 1 additional minute.
Thank you. So after those two meetings, one of the directives I gave to the police chief and fire chief was to order enough PPE, personal protective equipment, to last for 3 months. We scrambled to get everything. I personally drove over to the high school, picked up whatever PPE they had, brought it back to the police department, brought it to the fire department. We implemented a mask mandate when we reopened City Hall. One of the things that we have to do is communicate a lot with the public. So all of the information that I was communicating with the public was synthesized with the health department, which was the health agent, the health officer, who's a doctor, the health nurse, sometimes personnel, fire chief, but we were pumping out information to the public in amazing amounts. I mean, I had posted on my Facebook page at least over 400 times in the 9 months after information. That was also on the city website. So keeping the public informed about how they can keep themselves safer was another thing that we had done.
The next question will be asked by Crystal Brown Battle, and Mayor Heroux will be the first to answer.
Very good.
Thank you. Many people, when they think of public transport, have in mind mainly buses and trains. But there are other means of public transportation, including taxis, dial-a-ride, ride-sharing, and so forth. As Attleboro's population is growing, there will be even a greater need for public transportation. What are your thoughts about the city's transportation options currently available in our city? And do you think it needs to be expanded to meet the growing population? If so, how?
Oh, absolutely. So the mayor of Attleboro sits on the board, the advisory board for GATRA, the Greater Attleboro Taunton Regional Authority. Is the bus service around Attleboro. Attleboro also, as everybody knows, has two train stations, two hubs. One in South Attleboro, which is currently closed, which is going to open again. We are also in a position where whenever we use like a state grant to do some type of roadway improvement, we also have to include a bike lane in that. So there's a number of things that we have to do. Attleboro used to be home, when I was in high school, Attleboro used to be home to two different cab companies, one of which was actually a tenant of my mom's building for quite a number of years. Both of those have left, and the the industry of Uber and Lyft, the online industry, that has basically taken over a lot of what was here in Attleboro, here in communities all across the country. One of the things, when I was a state representative, one of the things we do, and I still do this now as mayor, is we advocate for more funding for GATRA to improve services. And I mean, GATRA, buying new buses, that's something that they have, they work on, but a lot of that comes down to state funding. The fares that people pay don't cover the actual the expenses that GATRA has to incur to, its operating expenses. So there is a lot of room to be done on that, and whoever the mayor is, they have a really good place being on the advisory board for GATRA.
Mr. McGee, same question, 90 seconds.
Thank you. In the McGee administration, I think you have to start by scaling these resources by capturing the data, capturing the trends, and the demographics by age. Millennials are going to transport the way they want to be utilize transportation. Our seniors are going to have their own choice on how they want to get around town. So we have to focus on capturing the data, looking at the trajectory of the demographics. And then once we do that, we identify the transit options, what type of mode of transportation, and then the third option would be deploy those resources. But you do it by scaling.
Mayor, you have an additional minute.
Very good, thank you. So Mr. McGee brings up some good points, and the GATRA administration does those things currently, using data to look at what the needs are of the people in the area. Another thing we have to start thinking about, we are moving towards, is electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, I believe, are going to be something that is going to be the dominant vehicle on the road in 10 to 15 years. I have an electric vehicle. Charging stations are everywhere. They're popping up in more places. We're looking at putting some charging stations here in Attleboro, one at the library, one in the city center, possibly one here at City Hall, which I will not be using, just to be clear. But that's another thing we have to look at. And those charging stations, one of the ways to supply power to those, because a lot of electricity is coal-based, one of the things we can do is actually use solar panels, solar carports above those to power, so that way we're not actually contributing to further greenhouse gases, but we're using solar power to power those cars.
Mr. McGee, you have an additional minute.
In deploying those different modes of transportation, we do indeed need to look at the carbon footprint, keep that in mind. And also, hopefully with the advancement of technology, those resources will be less costly for the municipality to acquire those resources. So certainly something that is going to be a part of that expansion of transportation.
Thank you, gentlemen. Last but certainly not least, Mike Kirby will ask a question, and Mr. Gee, you will answer first this time.
As Mayor Heroux already stated this evening, if he wins in November, he will not seek re-election for another 2-year term. Is it best for voters to elect a lame duck mayor, knowing the city council could simply ignore his proposals and wait for the next mayor to take office?
You know, it's interesting in this process. Never saw myself as a politician in getting into this, but here I am. You know, I've also come to realize, Mayor Hero kind of went back in history and mentioned Judy Robinson's term here, Mayor Dumas's term here, and of course Mayor Hero with his 2 terms under his belt. You know, I believe that every candidate has a shelf life, and that's determined by the will of the people. So, you know, if there's a mayor in place and they're doing their job, then the community will reflect that in their vote. Their vote is their voice.
Mayor, same question, 90 seconds.
The city council and I like to think we work well together. You know, we don't always agree on everything, and that's healthy. If I get reelected for a 3rd term, I'm going to propose things to the city council. Some of those things are going to be approved, some of those things are not going to be approved. And that's a good thing. You know, no one person should be able to determine everything. You know, there's a place for, you know, administration to, you know, be carried out. There's a place for, you know, the legislative body to, you know, set another tone and, you know, set the rules for the municipality. But I don't think that, you know, there is any concern about being a lame duck mayor, because during this 2nd term of mine, I hadn't yet made up my mind if I was going to run for a 3rd term until, you know, shortly before I announced. The city council and I, we got a lot done during that time, during that 2nd term. I think that the city council, you know, when they are looking at the ideas that I present to them, they're going to look at the merits of those ideas. And there's nothing in it for the city council to say, well, you know, we don't have to go along with this. The same thing can easily be said of the department heads. Department heads, you know, the people who have been, the professionals that have been doing their job for decades, they are outstanding. You know, we work really well together because I learned from them, and then I spread what limited resources we have around to make their departments function really well. I'll follow up in a moment.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 additional minute.
Thank you, sir. I'm convinced that the opportunity that I have here today as a candidate in this race is indeed because it requires you to get out and talk to the residents. And to Mayor Hero's credit, he's outworked his opponents in the past. And the feedback that I've gotten is projects versus quality of life issues. And I think our people are ready for quality of life issues.
Mayor, you have 1 additional minute.
Well, thank you. Actually, and Mr. McGee, I'm glad you mentioned that. So, you know, I talked about the city council, the department heads, and then the people. This is how many, this is about probably 40 people per page. This is how many people I've talked to on this election. What I have here is, over the last 8 years, this is how many doors I've knocked on. So if anybody ever wonders if I have a good pulse on what the people of Attleboro want, well, let's put it like this, I stopped counting at 50,000. This is over the course of 8 years. I get out and I knock on doors to talk to people to find out what it is that they want, to get a good sense of what direction the people want the city to go in. I've been rewarded by that in the past, and I think that based on the feedback I'm getting right now, the doors I've knocked on this season, I will be rewarded with that again, and I'll continue to do the work and the will of the people.
Thank you, gentlemen. So that completes another round. We will begin another set of questions for the panelists. I just want to remind the 2 candidates that Mike Kirby, although he's a great guy and asked the question, Mike Kirby's not going to be voting in November, nor is Bill Gouveia. The majority of the people that are here this evening probably already know who they're going to vote for. So I would suggest, and when you watch the playback of this, you'll say, geez, I wish I had looked into the camera more. So just keep that in mind. A little bit of advice. Mr. Gouveia, the guy no one's going to be looking at now. You get the next question.
I've made a career of not looking at the camera or the mirror. Gentlemen, can you tell us what you see as the city of Attleboro's two biggest strengths and its two biggest weaknesses? And how will you help take advantage of and harness the former, and how will you improve and address the latter?
Mayor, your first 90 seconds.
The two greatest strengths of the city are, number one, its people, and number two, the department heads who help run the city, providing services to the people. Those are the greatest strength and greatest weakness. I'm sorry, the two greatest strengths. The two greatest weaknesses, one is that we have limited money to provide services to people. There's not a single department that is adequately funded, staffed, or equipped. I wish we had more money to give to every department. Another weakness is coming out of, and this is a weakness that I think any community would experience, but this is a weakness that, it's the changing economy. We're going to an online economy. And that is something that challenges our way of thinking. We have to make sure that we have a robust economy. And we've had a number of successes in Attleboro. The marijuana industry, whether you like marijuana or not, that has been something that's brought in a lot of revenues to the city, which then gave us the means to do things, provide services to people, to improve the quality of life for a lot of people. That's what all of the city employees are here for. It's about quality of life. It's about providing a service to the people. It's about making sure that they're comfortable in their community, whether it's DPW improving a sidewalk or building a new sidewalk, whether it's the fire department responding to people who need help, council on aging or veterans. They're all there for the people.
Mr. McGee, same question, 90 seconds.
Absolutely. I would agree that people, but I would add community. And what I mean by that is when there's an event that is at Capron Park, when there's an event downtown, our community supports those different initiatives. And I think our community wants to see more of that. So we've got to make sure that we can provide those things, those different experiences, family-friendly experiences. And as we begin to do that, what do? We start to draw people in together to strengthen that mindset of community. The weaknesses are we're in a pivotal time. The pandemic has created some significant challenges. We have growth within our city, but we also have people that can no longer afford to live here. That's a hard balance to make, and we have to make sure that that's on radar moving forward. Additionally, we're divided. We're divided. Within those strengths, we also find ourselves being divisive with different political agendas that are out there. We've been polarized by the national election. We've become almost this tribalistic mindset, and that's not healthy for our community. So I'd like to see us be able to move those different issues back, move those different, let's get back to civil discourse amongst one another, and let's be able to have civil dialogue. And if we don't agree, let's agree to disagree, move on, and go out and have a coffee.
Mayor, 1 minute.
Thank you. I agree that community is also very important here in Attleboro. There's a number of things that I'm doing in my administration with the help of the department heads to enhance community here in Attleboro. One of them was the recent renovation of what we now call Cuddy Court, and that is the alleyway behind Santander Bank and behind the parking garage. That's now a venue for different events. We had a very successful concert there as the kickoff. I'm also looking at building a performing arts pavilion at Highland Park. We have a plan, we have a funding source, we have a design for it. We're in the process of just doing, sort of the paperwork for that to make that happen. But these are things that bring people together. The purchase of Highland Park was another thing that people were able to now use, and it's a cross-country course. We have a perfectly manicured park with Capron Park, but the intent and purpose of Highland is to give a different feel, a more natural park with meadows. So we have a lot of things going on in Attleboro to make Attleboro, including especially the downtown, a destination for people to come.
Mr. McGee, 1 additional minute.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you mentioned the amphitheater at Highland Park. You had campaigned on that back in 2019, and it's just a question that I have, it may be a question that others have, that why is it taking this long to get a plan going at Highland Country Club?
The format does not allow you to answer at this time, but I would recommend, having seen a few debates, that when you're asked the next question, start by answering Mr. McGee's question and then answer the next question. The next question, speaking of which, will be asked by Crystal Brown Battle, and Mr. McGee, you will answer first.
Homelessness and escalating housing costs are the human epicenter of the housing crisis. Other than not, mayor candidates have plans to deal with the city's housing problem. As was the case before the pandemic, the city of Attleboro, like many cities nationwide, had a severe housing crisis impacting many households. Moving forward, if you were to become or maintain being a mayor, what is your plan for creating pathways to permanent housing and sustain attention to the social stresses that drive many residents into financial crisis?
Thank you for that. In my work with Department of State, one of the most impactful places of poverty I've seen was in Ethiopia, where I saw families living on the sidewalk. And when I come back home to the United States, I say to myself, we're the wealthiest nation in the world. Why do we have so much homeless? Why do we have so much poverty that's here? And what can we do about it? And I think it's important that it starts on a grassroots level, that addressing those issues indeed start at the city level, but it also involves working with the state, our state elected officials. And there are state elected officials that are doing great work coming into Attleboro, addressing the homeless need, and not just with housing bodies, but bringing resources and bringing those resources, whether it's mental health or dentistry or any types of medical support for that community, to bring them dignity in their time when life has hit them extra hard.
Mayor, same question.
Very good. Let me answer the pavilion first. So the plan to have a pavilion has been something that's been in the works for a long time. COVID sort of derailed that, and it took up, navigating COVID, managing COVID was a second full-time job during, the beginning of the pandemic. So I also previously didn't have a funding source, but now we do have an identified funding source. And like I said before, we have a design. So, in the 37 Union Street, that's a project the city was working on in May of 2018. It just broke ground a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so. So to your question, Crystal, about the homelessness and housing. When I was a state representative, that was the one issue that I had to drop everything for. When somebody called up and said on a Friday afternoon they don't have a place to stay and the state agencies are not going to be available, that's when we have to quickly hustle to get somebody to one of the homeless shelters that are in either Brockton or Fall River. And then as mayor, when I took over as mayor, homelessness was something I pulled together a task force of people that I was previously working with, nonprofits, people at the state level. When Jim Hawkins was elected, I brought Jim Hawkins onto that. And just to be clear, this isn't something that I started. I continued on with the work that was going well before I was a state rep, and the work continues after I was no longer a state rep. We are doing a housing needs assessment. The housing needs assessment is going to look at what inventory we have and what do we need going forward, and that's going to help with our master plan, and I'll maybe more in a moment.
Mr. McGee, one additional minute.
Yeah, I think it's important that we also stop stigmatizing homelessness. We don't know people's background. We don't know what happened to them in their life. And the fact that it could be a family, could be an individual, we need to be able to have a compassionate heart, being able to be mindful that some people don't have the wherewithal to make it through this situation. And so if we can attack the homeless problem with that type of a mindset, and that's why I say I'm coming into the office with a servant leadership mindset, that's the spirit that we need to be able to resolve these issues.
Mayor, one additional minute.
I absolutely agree. We should not stigmatize homelessness or people with mental illness who often become homeless. We have a group of people who do a 1-1 count every year, and the 1-1, that's what we called it when I was working in jail and prison. It's basically a January snapshot of how many people are homeless right now, and there's chronically about 20 homeless people in the city. That doesn't include the transient population, people who are couch surfing, people who are living off their credit card, running up a credit card, then they find themselves out, on the street. When I was working in jail in Philadelphia, I was, in the intake unit, and I remember, frequently people would come back in because they would get 3 hot meals in a cot to sleep in, and they didn't have a place to stay. So one of the things that we've done in Attleboro over the last couple of years is opened up a reentry center to help people coming out of jail or prison, to be able to find a place to stay. That's at 95 Pine Street, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done on this. We could spend an entire debate, an entire hour talking about this issue alone.
Next question will be asked by Mike Kirby, and Mayor Hero will be the first to answer.
Mayor, you have an enviable track record on the environment, all from banning plastic bags to the release of batches of balloons. There's a controversial proposal now in the town of Brookline. They're proposing to ban fossil fuels in homes, and replacing boilers and furnaces with electric heat pumps. This is a very expensive thing that would hit the pocketbooks of just about every home here in Attleboro. Would you propose that during your final term if you are elected in November?
I probably wouldn't do that because Attleboro is not Brookline, and you have to look at what is going to pass. What has a chance of it. I have my own controversial proposal that with the Wetlands Protection Zone expansion, and that's with my initiatives on the environment, some of them require council approval, some of them don't. We have a lot of things that we've done in Attleboro. I mean, Attleboro is, historically a fairly conservative, community, but I think we're changing now, and it's a very diverse community. But some of the ideas that I've thrown out to the council have stuck. I would say most of them have. Some of them have not. Some of the things that we're doing here in Attleboro, we're going to be making an extra $200,000 a year for doing nothing. All we're doing is putting up solar carports above our parking lots, and there's going to be some over at the library, over at some of the schools, at the YMCA parking lots, city-owned parking lots, just by leasing out space. So there are other ways we can approach climate change and being good to the environment. But whenever we present something, we have to be mindful of what's the economic condition of the community that we're in. Attleboro is a gateway community. Our median household income is less than the state median household income. It's one of the variables that makes us a gateway community. And so what I don't want to do is present something that is basically dead on arrival. A healthy debate about something is okay, but I don't think that has a shot here in Attleboro.
Mr. McGee, 90 seconds.
Specific resources, I think, are good for certain communities. And, we're not a skyscraper city. We're here in the burbs, and we've got a very unique part of our housing, right? We have downtown housing, we have single-family homes, we have other residences that are zoned for multi-use, multi-family. So I think when we start looking at different types of resources, we have to also look at the unintended consequences. Mayor, I would say regarding your controversial wetlands proposal that it's controversial would probably be an understatement. It's impacted. I've got a document that is 47 pages of people that would have been affected by that proposal, by that ordinance. And I think it's something that when policy is put together, we need to think about, again, the divisiveness of the policy as well as the overall impact.
Mayor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, thank you. That 47 pages you have, actually those people are not impacted because every single one of those homes is grandfathered in. That's written into the language. This wetlands protection zone, I mean, I'm glad we're talking about it now. I know it's going to come up at some point. There's been basically nothing but misinformation surrounding it. I was meeting with Gary Arazian today, and Gary is the city planner. The history of this proposal was that I asked Gary and Nick Wiley, the conservation agent, and Gary Arazian, the city planner, ways we can help further reduce the loss of green space in the city, and he gave me a couple ideas. That was one of the ideas. And so I presented that to the city council. But it's loaded with exemptions and grandfathered provisions, and there's been basically nothing but misinformation around that. It's unfortunate because Gary is chomping at the bit to talk to the city council again to explain the facts of that, because the facts have not been the dominant dialogue in the discourse on it.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute to respond.
In sitting through the hearings, in sitting through the one meeting that was hosted by Gary Arasian, one of the residents, something that was stated was just really resonated with me. And this person is also a business owner in the city. And it was received as the government keeps taking. And that resonated with me when that statement was made. And it caused me to reflect that for me to be successful in this campaign, what types of policies are going to impact our residents, and what type of policies are our residents really going to be able to receive? Are they going to reject those policies, or are they going to feel that their government is working on their behalf for their best interests? Thank you.
The final round of questions from the three panelists will begin now with Bill Gouveia asking a question, and Mr. McGee, you will answer first.
Thank you, gentlemen. I know this is a surprise, but in government and business, things don't always go right. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that each of you, at one time or another, have made some type of mistake in your professional endeavors and lives. And I think that's a way that people judge how you handle those times. So without getting too personal or detailed, tell us about a time you made a mistake in your professional life and how you went about addressing it, so Attleboro citizens get an idea of how you would react if that rare circumstance occurred while you were mayor.
Absolutely. I believe that you need to just be forthwith. First of all, if there's a shortcoming, none of us are perfect. If there is a shortcoming within a person's service, within their professional life, own it, acknowledge it, step up, do better. I could go back and point to rookie mistakes within my law enforcement career. I can point back to mistakes made in my private sector business career. And it's a learning curve oftentimes where we fall short. But I know that in the spirit of public service, it's putting the constituents first. It's putting the community first. Within law enforcement, I took an oath of office, and I took it serious. And I've seen some of my colleagues from my former agency make very, very stupid mistakes, and some of them are going to go to jail for it. So I think it's important to be able to step up, own up, and then learn and move on.
Mayor, 90 seconds.
I'm going to give you two examples of things that I was wrong about. One of them was when I first learned that Highland Country Club went bankrupt. I wasn't interested in buying it. I said, we have better things to do with several $1 million than buy a bankrupt country club. It took about probably between 3 and 4 minutes of listening to Gary Arasian, the city assessor at the time, and Dennis Walsh, the rec director. The three of them just said, Paul, here's what's at stake. 130 homes could be built here. That's bad financially for the city. We have, it's every time a home is built, it's more resources on the, that expended. We would lose that green space forever. And I said, okay, so it just took them a couple minutes to convince me that I was wrong about that thinking. Another one, and this might sound a little bit funny, but when I came on board as mayor, and I've said this before to Barry, so he'll probably laugh if he sees this, I hated Barry Lacasse. He was the budget director. Oh man, I hated him, and I wanted to get rid of him, but I was patient, and I started working with him. And that guy was awesome. I mean, he was such a good public servant. And so, the takeaway from that is that, everybody that I work with, you have to listen to them. Every single department head, they are of value. And, I'm not a subject matter expert on any of their different departments. And so I use them every step of the way. I never make decisions alone. Thank you.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
I can tell you without a doubt that areas where I have fallen short, the common denominator was always emotion. And I've learned to teach my wife, my children, to never respond in emotion. And I will carry that into the executive office. I know this is a tough job. I know that things come hard at you. And I will work my best to maintain that composure in order to have discernment and clear thinking in order to make a better opportunity for our residents.
Mayor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, Mr. McGee's comments, I can also identify with that. Early in my political career, I might have responded quite quickly to harsh criticism. Generally speaking, now I ignore it. I mean, the amount of criticism that comes with this job it's incredible. I mean, there's so much that comes with the job. I typically function in this order. Whenever I make a decision, it's conscience first, the city second, and then the party third. And it was the same thing when I was at in Boston. Now, some people might say, "Oh my gosh, you're putting your conscience before the city." Every person who's elected, they're elected to be a delegate and a trustee, and you have to be able to live with yourself. Hopefully, whoever gets elected acts as both a delegate and a trustee, and they are exercising good conscience. But as I said a moment ago, I never ever make decisions alone, and I think that's why there haven't been any really big controversies, any big scandals or anything. Never make decisions alone. Always do everything as a team.
The next question will be asked by Crystal Brown Battle, and Mayor Hero will be first to answer.
For both Attleboro residents and city officials, diversity, equity, and inclusion are more important than ever. Cities want the competitive advantage provided by a team that reflects the diversity of their residents and brings a wide variety of viewpoints to the table. Please share with us what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you and why they're important.
Very good. Attleboro is an extremely diverse community. It's diverse racially, religiously, politically, economically. It is a very diverse community. In my job as mayor, one of the things I get to do is hire department heads. I've hired male and female, I've hired young and old, and having that diversity is important. When I am appointing people to boards, I'm also looking for diversity. I have a couple of vacancies on different boards and commissions right now, and quite honestly, I'm actually passing over white males because I'm looking to fill those positions with diverse candidates. I revived the Commission on Human Rights here in Attleboro, which strives to improve diversity and inclusion in the community. They look to find problems within the community, bring me recommendations. The Commission on Human Rights is an advisory board. Also, people with disabilities. That's another commission that I revived in my first year here, because people with disabilities have often been, left out. People who are coming out of jail or prison as well, regardless of the color of your skin, they're often marginalized. But when they come back to society, we want to make sure that they're going to be successful. That's why I worked with St. Vincent de Paul to have that reentry center. Originally, it was going to be the mayor's office of reentry, but we decided to instead of making an office in the mayor's office, private nonprofit ended up being a better one. Lots of things.
Mr. McGee, 90 seconds.
When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would also add to it belonging. That when we look into our school system, when we look into our professional workforce within the city departments, our employees, our students, they need to feel belonged. They need to feel welcomed in that environment. We also need to understand that when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, in my fourth add-on, belonging, we need to also understand that it goes far beyond race. We're talking about ageism bias. We're talking about implicit, explicit biases. So we need to be able to, one, have that understanding within the city departments. We need to have that understanding within our communities, and so that we understand how the community is made up within those diversification classifications in those different demographics. So there's a whole full spectrum when we begin to talk about DEI, and we need to truly understand the aspect that we're just not talking about race.
Mayor, you have an additional minute.
I'm glad Mr. McGee mentioned, the issues surrounding, particularly with police, because some of the training that we've implemented during my time as mayor, I've increased the police training budget because we do want people to, the police officers to be well trained, duty to intervene, implicit bias. These are courses that every single police officer in our police department have participated in, this calendar year and last calendar year. So we had other courses, but we've increased the training budget to make sure that they are, well trained. But there are, a number of things that we are doing with personnel. One of the things that I recently did was I participated in a Massachusetts Municipal Association seminar. It was a 3-part seminar on increasing diversity in a community. It has offered a lot of different ideas. I bring those ideas to personnel. We're talking about how to implement those. But you want the community that you are representing to mirror the people who are living there. It both ways.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 additional minute.
Absolutely. When I can speak to public safety after a 24-year career with the Mass State Police, the community, the public safety department needs to reflect the diversification of its community. And I was a product of affirmative action back in the 80s. And I can tell you that that policy wasn't the best, even though I benefited from it. I worked with people that never should have been on the department. And I think we need to understand that we need to be careful how we roll out these different balancing acts for hiring practices. We need to look at a person's record. We need to look at their capabilities. We need to make sure that that person is the right fit for the department that they are applying for.
The final question from our panelists this evening will be asked by Mike Kirby, and Mr. McGee, you will answer first.
The new Attleboro High School is well on the way to completion. But Attleboro has other schools that are beginning to show their age, or are well into showing their age. Are taxpayers facing any more school projects? And how would you propose to pay for them after the hefty tax increase needed to build that $250 million Attleboro High School?
It's a heavy price tag. I think we first need to understand in looking at the age of the infrastructure. Once we understand some type of a needs assessment is done on the properties, we then have to make an assessment. The MSBA came in and looked at the old high school, and they said, we're not putting any more money into it. Thus, we have a $260+ million project. So we need to be careful. We need to make sure that we're looking at financing and budgeting for those various needs. Some of that money may come from the different resources in the school budget. Maybe perhaps these are infrastructure projects that can be allocated through community development block grant money. But when it comes to the schools, they're unique, they're special, they're a large budget to the city in and of themselves. And so we do need to be able to make sure that we're not in another situation that the high school was in with the 8 other elementary and middle schools in the city.
Mayor, school buildings, you have 90 seconds.
Well, I'm happy to report to everybody that the new high school is on time and on budget right now. It's actually slightly under budget by anywhere from $400,000 to $1.4 million, depending on which bills have been paid at the time. It's scheduled to be open June of next year. The mayor doesn't get to control the school operations. The mayor gets to have a lot of say over the capital needs of the school department. So it's a very, I appreciate the question that it's asking about capital as opposed to school operations, because the mayor doesn't have any authority over that. But there's several ways you can pay for something. The first thing that has to happen is you have to have in the capital improvement plan an ask for a feasibility study for a new building, whether it's a new council on aging building or whether it's a new school or a police department, fire department, regardless of what it is, it has to be in the capital improvement plan. So as we start to see the buildings deteriorate, that's when the school superintendent will put that in the capital improvement plan. There's a couple of different ways to help pay for it. One of the ways is to get state funding that you have to apply for. We can also use existing revenues. We can start saving up. One of the things that I'm doing, because we need to start thinking about a new council on aging building, is I'm setting aside going forward $1 million a year from free cash, putting that aside as a down payment, so that way the bonds we take on a new building are not going to be nearly as high as they would have otherwise been. So we can save up for a down payment, we can take out bonds, we can get support from the state. There's lots of different ways we can go about that.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 additional minute.
To the mayor's point, the city charter is very clear that the executive office has its own authority and powers legislative body is our city council, and of course our school committee. And it's a unique situation where the mayor will approve the budget, but the school department spends it at their discretion. And, so it's a unique challenge. But again, there's still room for partnering, there's still room for working with each other and being able to look at those different areas to find and allocate funding as needed.
Mayor, 1 additional minute.
The the suggestions of Mr. McGee are exactly what we are doing. I have an excellent relationship with Dave Sawyer. He comes to me with the needs of the school department. I'll give you a good example. Brennan Wamsetta Middle Schools. Those roofs had leaked for 20 years. They were open in the late 90s, and then there was a fight when Judy Robbins was mayor. There was a fight between the contractor and then the manufacturer about the membrane on the roof, and they just kept leaking and leaking for 20 years. Kevin Dumas came on, and they continued to leak. Kevin Dumas was seeking support from the state. So as we were retiring old debt, Dave Sawyer and I got together, and we said, Dave, do you want to really wait for this anymore, or do you want to just do it? Let's just, this would be a $4 million investment, but that would protect that school. So investing in the infrastructure and taking care of it right now is what's going to help keep those buildings in good shape for as long as they are. The library is another one we're investing in right now. That'll be good for another 50 years because of the work we're doing now.
That concludes the questions from the panelists. The candidates will now ask each other questions. They each get 3 questions. Candidates will have 30 seconds within reason. I say 30 seconds because there are some candidates, I'm sure, who would make a 3-minute speech in asking a question. So 30 seconds to ask their question. The candidate answering the question will have 90 seconds. The candidate who originally asked the question will have 1 minute to respond. And the candidates will each get an additional minute to respond to each other's answers. Now that you know that and are totally confused, let's move on. The first question will be asked by Mr. McGee.
Mr. Hero, there are rumors going around about us. I'd like to address my first rumor about myself. The rumor is that I'm an activist, which is completely false. Anyone can Google and verify my name through Google or YouTube and see that my record is consistent with keeping our community and our country safe. The rumor I've heard about you, sir, is that you've tried to have one of tonight's panelists removed from the debate, and I'm asking if that's true.
Did I have is that true? Yes, actually it is. Bill Gouveia and I have not had a great relationship. I approached Craig Borges, the publisher, and said, Craig, you're putting somebody on the questioning panel who's shown an obvious bias to me in various columns. And when I reached out to Mr. Gouveia, his responses were, fairly dismissive. And even though I'm just trying to correct the facts on that, what I asked the publisher, and I basically, Craig Borges, what I asked him was, Craig, I just want a fair shot, and I don't want any, curveball questions or anything, So I think Craig probably spoke with Bill, and
No.
He didn't. Okay, so I'm pleased with the way that your questions went this evening, because
Thanks.
I was concerned about that. I don't believe that I've gotten a fair shake from you in the past, and like anybody who is doing a debate, you want them to ask questions fairly, and you want them to treat you fairly. And like I said, in several of the columns, I don't think I was treated fairly, and so I'm just looking out for a fair and impartial panel of people to ask questions.
Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute to respond.
As far as fair and impartial, it's a tough process. It's a tough process, and I've already felt the wrath of the Sun Chronicle. So again, thank you for putting that out there, and moving forward, fairness would be nice across the board in this process.
Mayor, you have 1 additional minute if you'd like. Yeah, I would like to address the issue of an activist. I don't think you're an activist. I stood with you at the Black Lives Matter rally in June of last year. I thought you gave an excellent speech, and whoever is calling you an activist, I kind of know who they are. They're people who are supporting another candidate, and it's unfortunate that they would tag you as that for the positions you took on. Having a fair and equitable police force. So I'm sorry that happened to you. It's really unfortunate that should happen to anybody, and we would label you as an activist like that.
Question number 2 will be asked by Mayor Hero to Mr. McGee.
Okay. Mr. McGee, one of the most important things that a mayor can do is, one of the tangible things, any mayor has to do this, is create a budget. I've created 4 budgets with the department heads and 2 different budget directors, and those have gone through the city council. What would you do different in your budget than what I have done in mine?
To answer that question, I think it's important to understand for the voters that department heads do submit level funding when requested. And as you again, I'm not sitting in your office as you go through this process, but as department heads will submit their level funding, then there must be some type of a process that you go through with your budget managers to ensure that the budgets probably are consistent with year prior. If there is additional cash in order to support that particular agency, that particular department, then of course I'm sure those allocations are made. For example, within the school budget, that number fluctuates, right? It's different every year, and there are reasons for that. And with that being said, I think it's important to know that it's working across the aisle. It's about understanding what the needs are. You've been very vocal about the departments being, not just tonight, but in your past debate, about departments being underfunded and understaffed. So you have to manage and you have to work within those constraints. I realize that pulling money out of the air or squeezing extra money out of receipts coming into the city is impossible. You have to be able to work with what you have available. If there is grant funding available through different programs based on your initiatives, then of course you'll allocate accordingly.
Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you for that. You didn't really answer the question, though. I asked what you would do differently, and I'm actually glad you didn't say you would do anything differently. It was actually probably the right answer to not say you would do something differently, because to do anything differently is just going to take away from another department. I submitted 4 budgets. The process works that we ask the budget, each department to bring to me a budget proposal. We go through that literally with a ruler, go down line by line, look at past spending and what we have, what the needs are, and we go through that with each department head. Every department has needs that are always growing, and so we don't always level fund things, though. With police training, for example, when I took over as mayor, it was $50,000. Now it's $125,000. With the special ed stabilization fund, that didn't exist. Now it's at $700,000, and hopefully before the end of the year it'll be at $1 million using free cash. So the process by which, I'll follow up in a second. I'll stop there.
Okay, Mr. McGee, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, Mayor. Thank you. I think it's a matter of, again, there's going to be a learning curve for myself, but I can share with you that having to work through federal procurement with some of the contracts I've had, local, state contracts, following Mass General laws and the different funding guidelines that are established within the Mass General laws will be of great assistance, and also will force me to be in compliance, which is critical, especially around the education funding. So that's something that I envision moving forward, that I need to get smart on, focus on, and then of course make sure that we're listening and listening for opportunities for departments to receive additional funding when available.
So there's what I'm saying. Thank you for that. The process, so we go through the budget with each of the department heads, and then we submit something to the city council. The city council in my first 2 budgets didn't cut anything. The entire budget went through. It was a delicate balance of making sure every department got as many resources as they could with limited money. In the 3rd budget, the city council cut a number of things because it was COVID year, and they weren't sure what revenues were going to come in as. all of those things were restored. In the fourth year, the budget I submitted went through without any cuts. There are a number of unions that you have talked to that are looking for additional funding. So I don't know where that additional funding that they're looking to you is going to come from when we already have a very delicately balanced budget.
The next question will be asked by Mr. McGee to Mayor Hero.
Mr. Mayor, your recent report that was released, the Natural Hazard Mitigation Report, by the way, it's a fine document. It's great work done there. It makes reference to cooling centers as a preparedness measure. By implementing these measures, did you get it wrong back in 2019 when you didn't support other elected officials with helping out some of our seniors and underserved residents with cooling centers?
No, absolutely not. And I'm glad you mentioned the hazard document. This is one of the things that you said we need to do that we've already done, and hence my comments about you outside of this room that have been your campaigning on things I'm already doing. The fact is that a cooling station is something that falls under the jurisdiction of the fire chief. It doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of city council members. I've spoken with the fire chief numerous times about this, and at the time, he didn't feel a cooling center was necessary. There was no need for a cooling center. There were no people that were saying, okay, where's the cooling? During a power outage, we might think differently. But this is coming from the fire chief. So I take the guidance of the city's emergency management director, the fire chief, over city councilors who showed up and took pictures, and there were more city councilors there and bottles of water, but pretty much nobody showed up. People can go to a Dunkin' Donuts, they can go to the grocery store. If anybody ever has an emergency and their health is in question, they're concerned about themselves, they can dial 911. The fire chief has actually told me it's cheaper for the city to buy people air conditioners than it is to open up a cooling center. What those city councilors did was in a violation of the city charter because they got involved with operational matters, but it also threw a real wrinkle in the relationship the chief had with other other fire departments in the area, because it has to be a combined effort with other. It's supposed to be regional. So no, I did the right thing.
You have 1 minute to respond.
In my understanding of preparedness in my professional and in my public and private life, preparedness is about thinking before and having measures in place prior to any type of a all hazards approach. And if it's cheaper for the city to purchase air conditioning, one, did that happen? Two, if going back to the cooling in potential warming centers, we're not necessarily talking about overnight accommodations. We're really just talking about just trying to get folks some temporary relief until that 2 or 3 day heat wave passes. And on the work of the city council, I think it's a hard issue. I understand operations, I understand budgets, but if there are resources where we can help our residents, again, that falls in that quality of life issue that I really think that we need to focus in for our residents.
So what I hear you saying is that you know better than the fire chief, who is the city's emergency management director, what we should do and when. I depend on the department heads to tell me what to do, and if it makes sense, you don't just obey what they say, but you listen to them. You have a relationship with them. The fire chief and his expertise are invaluable. We actually did have a warming station at one point during my time as mayor, and we opened that up because there was a power outage. But if there's a power outage and people can't heat their homes, we will act. If there's a power outage and people can't cool off and there is a demand for it, we will act. The fact of the matter is, this is a problem in search of a solution. There was no demand for a cooling station. This was back in 2019. This was city council members saying we should do this. It was actually one of my opponents was one of the chief cheerleaders of this. The fire chief was furious because, again, a cooling center has to be a regional effort with other fire departments. We had firefighters from other communities in here in Attleboro, and the fire chief didn't even know about that.
1 minute.
I travel around the world and around the U.S., and I teach preparedness measures. I train international police in other countries, police departments that have hundreds of thousands of members within it. And the preparedness measures, and if there's anything that we learned after 9/11, it's about being ill-prepared. And so, not to take anything against Chief LaChance, but I would respectfully say that preparedness measures in this regard are essential. And again, we're not talking about having overnight accommodations necessarily, but just having resources available for those in need. If it's 2, 3 people, that's a life, and I think it's worth something.
Mayor Hero, it's your turn to ask a question of Mr. McGee.
Okay, very good. Mr. McGee, one of the, in my opinion, the two most important qualities of somebody in this position as mayor is that you have to be honest and you have to listen. So, with respect to, listening to department heads, how are you going to value their advice when in some places you won't have any expertise, but how are you going to value their advice when they might have different advice than you with respect to the expertise that you have?
Thank you for that question, and that's a great question. Something that I truly value is data. And when we look at the mission of the department, one of the initiatives that I would ask is that our department heads provide data. I'm going to be new to the position if I'm successful in this process. And one, I want to get to know the personnel as well as what the mission is for the specific department. Once data is provided, once we understand the mission of what their particular department is, then from there, there's an assessment process, there's an evaluation process that would have to go in place. The next thing is just dialogue. What are the department heads looking at for challenges? How can I help them achieve their goals? And I think it's across the table collaboration that's going to be essential. And I also think that it's if it requires a policy change or a policy update, those policies should be driven by the collection of the data.
So, in fact, once again, you've described what we're already doing. Every department head, I meet with every department head at least once a month. I have a standing meeting with all of them to find out what their needs are, what the challenges they're facing, and to provide them, whatever assistance I can so that would help them run their departments. On numerous occasions throughout this campaign, I've heard you actually, disagree with different department heads. For example, with with water department, you have talked about the need for a plan or a task force to come up with a water replacement plan. Tata and Howard did that in 2017, and we started implementing that in 2018. We are, in fact, replacing water mains throughout the city and then the roads that are on top of those. With respect to, and I know this is something you're going around talking to people at the doors about, with respect to our trash program, if you would listen to the video of Alan Perry, the then health agent, he talked about all the data points and why the trash contract is exactly the way it is.
You have 1 minute, Mr. McGee.
I think 2 points to bring up. One, if I'm highlighting things that you're already doing, I must have a pretty good handle on the direction of the city as an outsider. I think my newness is actually showing some gravitas about the capability to run the city. Secondly, it's communication. A video or a letter that comes in the mail is communication. I've received your correspondence. I commend you for having that level of communication as it's necessary. But I think we're in the day and age where we need to understand the proper platforms for communication and getting a better and more robust understanding about the different city services and about how the direction of the city is going for our residents.
You have 1 minute, Mayor.
So thank you, and I disagree with you with your understanding of the issues, because what I hear you speaking in is platitudes. with no real answers on how you would do anything different than what we're already doing. So I'm not really sure what the value add is. As far as communication. The city communicates a lot of different ways. One of the ways is direct mail to residents. Anytime we have, and I started this in March, anytime we have a public works project, I communicate with the people that are going to be affected by that. I put those things on social media. We put those things on the city website. We contact AACS, contact the Sun Chronicle. Every available means of communication that could go out is going out. But going, people can accuse me of a lot of different things, but not communicating with the public is something that I don't think I can be accused of being poor at.
Time for the final question from Mr. McGee. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Going back to Highland Country Club, you touched on this in your 2019 debate. You campaigned on the Performing Arts Theater. And you're still talking about that, sir. The only difference now is you're calling it an amphitheater. You've had 2 years to provide some level of planning, and it has the appearance that you're just kicking the can down the street, with all due respect. Other than conjecture, there's no other evidence to date that we've seen for a viable plan for Highland Country Club. So again, that opportunity to respond.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. That's actually a really nice question. Anybody can request, through a public records request, the emails that have gone back and forth between me and the task force I have on this. Back in 2019, before the pandemic broke out, I started working with a group of teachers at the school department, and I asked the school superintendent to put me in touch with the different principals at the different schools. And I asked for people at the elementary school, middle school, and high school level in the performing arts, because I wanted to work with people who had experience, in using a performing arts venue. Actually, I'm not calling it an amphitheater. I did call that once, but now we're calling it a performing arts pavilion. Since then, we've also got a designer, somebody who lives in Attleboro, somebody who has designed something, and that design is available to be seen. We have a location. We've worked with Park and Forestry for a place to put that. I was looking at a lot of different ways to fund this until Jack Jacoby, who's well known in the community, said, "Paul, I'm one of the trustees of the Everett Carpenter Trust." And the Everett Carpenter Trust is, Everett Carpenter was a park superintendent who left over $200,000 to the city, and so that's basically the ground money for this project. COVID slowed a lot of that down. I wasn't able to meet with the members of that task force that I put together, but that task force is still in operation. We're actually doing things with the city solicitor right now to separate out the clubhouse from the rest of the park, because I'll hold that thought. I'll continue on in a moment.
Mr. McGee.
I'm a big fan of working groups and task forces. A McGee administration would implement the Highland Country Club Working Group, comprised of business executives, business owners from our community, and chambers of commerce, to come up with a shared use space concept that generates revenue, outdoor classroom spaces for Attleboro Public School System, agriculture growth, and family-friendly assembly space for special events. This project will be done in phases and most likely funded with CDBG Community Development Block Grant money.
Mayor, you have 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. So the task force that Mr. McGee just alluded to is something I did shortly after we purchased it. I brought together 2 residents from every ward in the city, so that way we had the entire city represented. I think maybe Ward 2 might have had 3 people in it though, because it was in that Highland Country Club's in Ward 2. So we had multiple public hearings. We put together a document which is on the city website. It's still on my Facebook page for anybody to look at. And so the future use of the country club was already done. We did a task force on that. One of the things that came out of that, those public meetings where the public came in, offered up ideas about what we'd like to do. One of those things was a performing arts pavilion. And so, as I was saying a moment ago, what we have is now my second task force on this, and we do have a funding source. When the city solicitor is now working on separating out the park from the clubhouse, which we probably will end up selling off.
Boy, if only the presidential candidates obeyed this well. Mr. McGee.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The final question will be asked by Mayor Hero to Mr. McGee.
Very good. Mr. McGee, do you support police and fire getting out of civil service?
Oh, great question. Great question. I've actually sat on, let me answer your question first by saying the direction, I would listen to the direction of both Chief Heagney and Chief LaChance. However, I have sat on a review panel for promotional exams for both police and fire, not promotional exams, but promotional process. And the process is actually something worth looking into. And the process consists of the candidates going for the top executive position within the police or fire agency, and they're given scenario-based questions. Now, civil service departments are not going to go through that process because they have a different process. But the fact that other departments like North Attleboro that has left the civil service and is now an accredited agency, they go through the scenario-based hiring process. And Chief John Riley went that direction because he wanted to get away from the issues around the civil service restraints. So right now, public safety is a very challenging, very difficult industry, profession. There are people that are leaving the profession, and it's just tough right now with community and police relations. So certainly something that's worth looking into.
Okay. So what I heard you say is that you would chat with the police chief and the fire chief. I can unequivocally tell you, police chief and fire chief both want out of civil service. No question about that. But I didn't hear you say that you would actually agree with them. Now that you know that, maybe you didn't know that before, but now that you know that, unequivocally, they want out of civil service so they can have a much easier time hiring people. Would you support getting out of civil service? And doing so is going to put you at odds with the fire union who supports you. You know, how are you going to reconcile that?
Sure, we have to talk about that. We have to sit down at the table, across the aisle, find out the concerns. Let's weigh out, I like to take an approach, pros and cons. Let's weigh those out. Let's measure what management sees as best for the agency. Let's hear what the union and their position is for their union members. And let's examine what the process looks like. Let's play it out behind closed doors at the table. And I know and have been a part of the process, not just the hiring process, but also the promotional process with the scenario-based format. So I know it works. I know it's a great alternative. And if it came to the point where there was an impasse, then again, we would have to be able to sit down and be able to reconcile, to your point, what those different concerns are.
Mayor, final minute on this subject.
So I didn't hear you answer the question, yes, you would support what the police chief and the fire chief want. And that's, you know, one of the big concerns I have is that a lot of the things I've heard from your campaign are actually very much at odds with the department heads who are here right now. I never, ever make a decision alone, ever. That's how I'm going to get myself into trouble if I do that. Everything I do as a team with the department heads, talk to personnel about it, sometimes involve the city solicitor. Everything is a team effort. But on numerous occasions, whether it's with respect to trash, whether it's respect to you know, the civil service, which I believe you probably know more about it than I do. But you know, this is something that I haven't heard you really be on the same page as the department heads. And so if you were to come in, I worry that you would be at odds with them a lot, if not micromanaging. And I don't think that's in the best interest of the city.
That concludes the question and answer portion of tonight's debate. It's now time for closing statements. Just as the order throughout the evening was determined by a coin flip, this was determined as well. The candidates will have 3 minutes each, and the first to deliver his closing statement will be Mr. McGee.
Thank you. Before I close, I need to address 2 questions that were asked of me by a resident who is now a tremendous supporter. One, am I an activist of any kind? No, I am not. I have no interest in that in any way or connected to any organization. I'm a very public figure, so I encourage anyone listening tonight to Google my name or search my name on YouTube, and I guarantee that you will see my background and my presence as it relates to keeping our country and our communities safe from terrorists. I also present about breaking news and current events. You can check on Boston 25, formerly Fox 25, ABC, NBC 10, CBS, NECN, and even Fox National. Point 2, where do I stand in regards to CRT? CRT was the second question, and I don't believe that CRT belongs in our school system. And I publicly stated so at the school committee over the summer. So here's the question at hand. Why should you elect Todd McGee? Tonight you are presented with a very bold choice for change. I'll give you 20 reasons. A bold vote for change means transparency, acknowledging my shortcomings as I am not perfect, retaining and increasing training and education for our public safety professionals. A bold vote for change means creating a new two-tier work-off program for our seniors. A bold vote for change means investing in our students, staff, and faculty at our school systems by funding above net school spending every year. A bold vote for change means working towards hiring more teachers for smaller classrooms. It means more adjustment counselors to address potentially at-risk students. It means enhancing our students' learning with outdoor classrooms. A bold vote for change means supporting the good work of the ARA. A bold vote for change means tackling our aging water infrastructure problems and roadway conditions. A bold vote for change means leading us through another year of COVID mitigation with my 6-point COVID mitigation plan. A bold vote for change means leveraging RFID technology for trash collection services to increase efficiency and cost in order to hopefully get rid of the small blue barrels. A bold vote for change means treating the rat infestation problem as a public health emergency in order to eradicate the problem. A bold vote for change means working to develop a solid multi-use plan for Highland Country Club. Working across the aisle with City Council and in the school department. It means striving to fill the vacant commercial space in downtown. A bold vote for change means the creation of a digital citizen initiative to revamp the city website for a better customer service experience. It means working with our local, state, and elected officials to address our homeless population and give people dignity and respect because life hit them pretty hard. A bold vote for change means servant leadership. A bold vote for change means listening and responding to your quality of life issues. Thank you.
Mayor, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, thank you for, participating in this process. It's, I've enjoyed this, discussion we've had tonight, and, I reiterate that a lot of what you're campaigning on, if not almost, all of it, we're already doing. And some of that started under my tenure as mayor. The city is actually, in really good shape. We have a balanced budget with no layoffs. We have a lot of new initiatives going on. On Park Street, there is one vacancy in the center of Attleboro. One, on Park Street. Bank Street still has a little bit of work to do. North Main, South Main, we're still working there, but Park Street hasn't seen one vacancy in decades. That has a lot to do with the work that we're doing, and again, it's a team effort. Everything I do with other people, in city government. I never make decisions alone. That way of doing business, that way of managing the city, listening to people, oftentimes means that I am the quietest person in the room during a meeting. And because I'm listening to what it is that, the issues are, the challenges, and when the end of the meeting is upon us, usually the most obvious course of action is what has been presented. As far as, listening to people, constituent service work is probably the single biggest piece of the pie that I do. In fact, constituent service work and personnel matters occupy more than 50% of my time. Sometimes people say that, Paul, you're an activist on the environment. Honestly, that only occupies less than 1% of my time. It gets a lot of media and a lot of ink, but that's less than 1% of what I do. But constituent service work, dozens of people contact me every day, through Facebook, through emails, through phone calls, and that responding to somebody, as cliche as this might sound, if it's important to you, it has to be important to me. Because the worst thing that can happen is when I go and knock on somebody's door and they say, you didn't respond to my email. You didn't respond to my phone call. You didn't help me out when I needed you. And that, and I never want that to happen. So I call everybody back. I respond to every message. There are sometimes I can't do things. Sometimes the mayor doesn't have the legal authority to do something. Sometimes the mayor has to actually do something. And there are people who have come to me and asked me to do something, and I didn't have the legal authority to do that. Those people now support my opponent. And that happens. But this job is about making the lives of people better. As I said at the beginning of this discussion, this is the most rewarding job I've ever had. I absolutely love this job. I committed to 2, maybe 3 terms. I'm looking forward to a 3rd term and not a day more. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you to our 3 older panelists, and especially Shane Mukasa. You did a great job. Want to thank these sponsors. Earlier, I forgot to mention the United Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Sun Chronicle, and of course, AACS. Want to thank all of you watching at home this evening, those of you here in City Hall. Election results on November 2nd. November 2nd is Election Day. Election results will be on AACS Channel 15 after the polls close. Now, in addition to the position of mayor, there's other races down the ballot. City clerk, there'll be a new city clerk after November 2nd. City council races, school committee races, those will all be determined, so please go to the polls. On behalf of everyone seated here, everyone at the Sun Chronicle, everyone at AACS, and everyone at the United Regional Chamber of Commerce, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on November 2nd.